Hello, everybody. It is Tom, and today we are talking about queer and trans stuff. Yay. Yeah. Okay, so I asked you guys to send me your questions related to queer stuff and trans stuff, and you sent me questions. So, yay, thank you for doing that. So, today we're going to go through some of your questions. Sadly, we will probably not be able to go through all of them, but we're going to go through some of them, and hopefully in a future video, we'll look at the rest of them, or a lot of them. So, yes, that is what we're going to do. All right, so most of your questions were pertaining to trans-related stuff, which is not surprising since many of you are members of the queer community and thus might not have like as many questions about queer stuff in general. But yeah, let's look at some of your questions. So we'll start with a question by Raf, who asks, "What advice would you give to someone questioning their gender identity? How did you or would you go exploring that? Asking this as someone who has been identifying as questioning for years at this point." So everyone is different, obviously, but I can tell you what I did. So as I've mentioned before, I I had two times when I realized that I was trans. First, when I was in college and about like 19 or 20, I thought that I might be, and then people around me reacted really negatively to it, and so I was just like, okay, never mind, and I went back in the closet. And at that time, there weren't that many resources available about being trans anyway, so it was definitely a more difficult environment back then. But so the second time that I realized I was trans, the time that stuck, was during the pandemic in 2020, and obviously standard thing that like we are still in the pandemic. The pandemic is still happening, but when I say in the pandemic, I mean like when we were really in the thick of it and everyone was still quarantining and still like acting like they cared about the fact that we were in a pandemic, some of them. So in 2020, um, I had an epiphany moment where I realized that I was trans, and before that, I had identified as gender fluid because I was like, well, I don't really feel like a girl, but I don't think I can be a guy, so I'll just say I'm somewhere in between. When I started figuring out that I might be a trans guy, or at least identify way more strongly towards the masculine side of the spectrum than anything else. Um, the first thing that I did was start watching YouTube videos from trans guys, and kind of listening to their stories and hearing them talk about their experiences. I read so many books on the subject. So I basically went into Amazon and just typed in like trans man, transgender man, trans masculine memoir, and things like that. One of the books I read was Sorted by Jackson Bird, which I really recommend. Very good book. But yeah, I would suggest like googling things like that, or even just looking at, I'm sure there's websites devoted to that kind of thing as well. But basically, I was just taking in all the stories of trans people that I could to see what I identified with and what struck a chord with me. And then I started thinking about other things like, okay, in a perfect world, if there was no stigma attached and I didn't have to worry about the huge mountain that I would have to climb here to get everyone in my life to start referring to me by different pronouns, a different name, all this crap you have to do in order to transition, would I want to be a guy? And the answer was, well, yeah. So I started thinking about things like, well, what do I feel comfortable with, and what don't I feel comfortable with? And the pronoun situation was one of the first things, pronoun and name, because she pronouns were really rubbing me the wrong way at that time. Like anytime someone referred to me with she or girl or pretty or any word that was associated with the sun is coming out right now, of course, because it's been gray all morning, but now when I'm recording, the sun is like, uh. Anyway, yeah. So words were really hitting me hard at that time, and the pronoun she especially really itched when I had it directed at me. So I started by just asking my friends, first of all, telling them what was going on with me and asking them not to use the pronoun she towards me, and also not to call me a girl or a woman or any of those words that just did not feel right to me. And my name also felt very wrong because it was a super, it was a very feminine name, and there's nothing wrong with feminine names. It just did not feel right to me. So I started looking around for names that I might want to use. Yeah, so basically, like, just kind of figuring out what was making me feel uncomfortable and how I could feel more comfortable. And I think it's important to remember that for me, finding a label was helpful. Being able to say, I am a trans guy, haha. I probably didn't say haha, but that was helpful. But you don't have to find a label. It doesn't have to be. You can just say, like, I am gender nonconforming, or you can say nothing. You can just be like, hey, this is me, what's up? Getting back to advice for someone who is questioning their gender, yeah, I would say just get as much information as you can. See what other people's stories can tell you, what you relate to and what you don't. And then just look at yourself personally and what makes you uncomfortable and what doesn't. Remember, you don't have to label yourself. There's nothing wrong with being questioning. There's nothing wrong with labeling yourself as just, non-binary. Non-binary literally means not in the binary. So if you feel like, if you're saying like, oh, I don't know if I'm trans, but I don't think I'm cis, you might just be in the middle somewhere, and that's fine. But yeah, in conclusion, that's my advice. Yeah, and as I said, I can only speak for myself. I can only speak from my own experience. And I think that's why it's so important to get as much information from as many sources as you can so you can see the whole beautiful spectrum, the whole rainbow of identities and, things like that. So, yes. Okay, I hope I answered your question somewhere in there. It was kind of rambling and took a really long time, but yeah. Okay, so let's move on to a question from Heidi D. So Heidi asks, do trans people lean more heavily towards heterosexuality or homosexuality? Do you find that trans people lean more towards one or the other? So, like with anyone, so one thing that's very important to remember is that your gender identity and your sexuality are completely unconnected. Like, just like cis people have a rainbow of sexual orientations, trans people also have a rainbow of orientations. So like there's not really a connection there. But with that said, transitioning does sometimes lead someone to identify in a different way sexually, not only because the terminology changes, but also because, okay, let me give you an example. So if you are a trans guy, okay, let's say you're a trans guy and you're pre-transition, and everyone, maybe you're even closeted, everyone in your life sees you as a girl, which means that people you date also see you as a girl. So if you are attracted to men and you're with a man, the dynamic is man-woman, which is wrong to you because you are not a woman. So I know it's fairly common for trans guys after they come out to realize that they are attracted to men when previously they thought that they were not. So like, I'm not sure if I'm explaining this well, but like after you come out, suddenly you're saying, I'm a guy, you're being seen as a guy, and if you are with another guy, the dynamic has somehow become very different. I would say a lot of trans people are more open to exploring attractions that they might have felt before, but didn't explore before because their closeted identity made it very difficult to embrace those things. So here's a question from Andre Perrin asks, I'm curious to know if there are levels or degrees of transitioning. For example, is someone changing only names, pronouns, clothing, and appearance, no surgery, considered trans? Can it be all in the head with no physical transformation other than clothes, hair, hormonal therapy, and legal paperwork? Among those trans people who choose surgery, how many go for step number 2, sex reassignment surgery? Okay, and I assume you're talking about bottom surgery. But I don't think we use the phrase sex reassignment surgery anymore. I think that's more of an outdated term, but I think gender affirmation surgery is one of the expressions that we use now, or is one of the terms we use now. But one very important thing to know is that a trans person is trans regardless of what steps they take to transition. So, like, for example, if you have someone who has long hair, is wearing makeup, goes by a feminine name, uses she, her pronouns, but inside... That's a really loud siren. It's a really loud siren right now that's just getting closer and closer. Louder and louder. We'll just wait. We'll just wait for it to be done, and then I'll keep talking. Okay, so you have this person who, to an outside observer, appears to be a cis woman. But inside, they know they are a trans guy. They are a trans, they are a guy. It doesn't matter if their body has not been changed, if their pronouns have not been changed, if their clothing, none of that has any connection whatsoever to their identity. And I think it's also important to remember that gender identity and gender expression are very different. So, like, you can be a trans guy who likes to wear dresses. You can be a cis guy who likes to wear dresses. Like, we are the ones who decided what clothing matches what gender and what, makeup or no makeup, long hair or short hair. That's all completely made up. So gender expression has nothing to do with your gender identity. You can be anything and wear anything, and it doesn't change who you are. So with that said, many trans people don't feel comfortable in the situation where they are being perceived by everyone around them as a gender that does not match their gender identity. So going back to the example of the trans man who has long hair, wears makeup, wears feminine clothing, is referred to as she and her and by a feminine name. In that situation, most trans people that I know would feel dysphoria, would feel uncomfortable and kind of wrong and itchy and like just a feeling of this isn't right, this isn't me. So most trans people do want to have some form of transitioning, but many don't, and that's fine. That's completely fine. And I think that's also where like the non-binary or gender non-conforming sort of spectrum is so useful, because the binary extremes that we have created, this is man, this is woman, just don't fit. And so instead of like trying to figure out exactly where you fit in there, I think it's kind of freeing to just say, well, man doesn't fit, woman doesn't fit, I'm something else. I'm just me. Like, I think that's pretty cool. So, in conclusion, a trans person is trans no matter what they're wearing, no matter where they are on their transition journey. If they choose never to transition, they're still trans. And regarding trans people who choose surgery, how many go for bottom surgery or the full package of top surgery and bottom surgery if you're a trans guy, or like bottom surgery if you're a trans woman? It really depends on the person. Like, there are many trans people, and especially like I know a lot of trans guys who are like, well, I definitely want top surgery, but I don't think I want bottom surgery. Or like, oh, I definitely want top surgery, but I'm not sure about bottom surgery. So like, it really depends. I don't have any data or statistics on how many choose one thing or the other, but it depends. How comfortable we feel with our own bodies is a really personal thing. So like, for some people, they're just completely comfortable making no bodily changes and just dressing or, altering their appearance in other ways. And for other people, they just want to go the whole distance. Like, their dysphoria can only be conquered by a full body change. So it really depends on the person. I'm going to do one more. So we had a lot of good questions from Alan K. Let me read some of these. So we have, considering everything that's going on in the US, how worried are you that your rights are in jeopardy? How do you deal with negativity and judgment? How do you respond when people say that being trans is a fad? Is there prejudice in the trans community? Things like that. So I might answer some of these questions later, but for now, let's talk about the situation, everything going on in the U.S. How worried are you that your rights are in jeopardy? Yeah, I'm real worried. I'm real worried. So yeah, it's very alarming, the rising anti-trans sentiment that's going on in the U.S. and of course in the U.K. And with a certain author really pushing her views, and just people on the anti-trans side getting more and more rabid and like spreading misinformation and outright false information. And like there's some deep fake videos out there of like children watching drag queens getting all sexual. There's weird stuff going on, you guys. And I mean, the majority of it is politically motivated, at least in the US. Conservatives, especially, have latched onto this issue because they think it's an easy way to win votes. It's an easy way to, swing things towards their party's platform. And it's really disheartening. And, like, they are using children as an excuse. It's always about protecting the children, isn't it? Like, all of the anti-gay crap that went on for so many years and still goes on in many places, so much of it was based on that lie of we're just trying to protect the children. And that's the same thing that's going on now with the anti-trans movement that's going on. So, yeah, I feel like I should probably devote an entire video to this subject, so maybe I will at some point. But for now, I'm just going to say that it's very scary and it's very disappointing and upsetting. And, like, especially the certain author who I assume we all know who I am talking about. The most recent awful thing she said was that she feels like trans people are like Death Eaters in her books because they're like a secret society that has to hide themselves, but now is rising up to take down. Like, what the are you talking about? Like, this is just like, what? Like, I am literally sitting in my home, reading and writing my little queer books, and like all I want is to be able to go out in public and like use the bathroom if I have to, and have people not try to kill me when I'm walking around. Like, what mass conspiracy do you think is happening here? Like, are you so far gone into the alt right that you think that there's some like underground secret society of trans people who are getting together every night and being like, yes, how can we take down the cis people? How can we convert the children? Like, what is your problem? Literally, all we are saying is if your kid is trans, you should support them. That's it. We're not saying anything but that. We're saying if your kid is trans, you should support them. If an adult is trans, you should treat them like a human being. We just want to have rights and exist and be humans. Like, we are not f***ing Death Eaters, Joanne. So anyway, so in conclusion, yeah, it's a very messy situation and very alarming. But I will say that there are so many people fighting on the right side, and so many people who are trying to stop transphobia and protect trans kids and support trans kids and make sure that we don't continue in this direction. And it's not going to be an easy fight. Like, anytime a marginalized group starts getting rights, suddenly the people who don't want them to have rights start like rising up and throwing everything they can at why this shouldn't happen. But eventually we get past it. So I very much hope that that's what happens here, because yeah, it's pretty terrifying, and my heart goes out to all the trans and queer people in those states who are working so hard to just eradicate us from existence. Like, and it's so funny, like, people who want trans people to use the bathrooms that align with their gender assigned at birth, like, they never think about the trans guys. They never think about, like, these buff hairy dudes who would then have to go into the women's restroom, because they don't want to think about that. They just want us to not be in public. Like, they want us not to be. That's what they're saying. They're not saying, like, they're not trying to protect children. They're not trying to protect women from the scary trans predators. They just want us not to be here, because it's easier when we're not here. It's simpler when we're not around, because they don't have to think. So, yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, I hope you enjoyed my multiple rants in this video, and thank you so much for everyone who answered questions. If I didn't get to your question, I do apologize. I'm going to try to answer more of them in a future video. And if you have any additional questions, pop them in the comments. I'd love to address them at some future date. So thank you, and thank you, as always, to our patrons, who are wonderful and amazing and fantastic and great. And a special shout out to our Nick Nelson members, Kelly Walker, Book Nerd Charlie, Paul Z, and Michelle. All right, and as the sun continues to wreak havoc on my lighting, I will see you guys next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night or whatever. I'll see you again some other time. All right, bye. Say you're coming